Welcome back to Vuln Vibes. In this episode, we are going to talk about GitLab vulnerabilities. Specifically, if you are running a self-managed instance, and that means both Community Edition, CE, and the Enterprise Edition, EWEL, your patching schedule needs some immediate attention. Our mission today, a really detailed forensic deep dive into those recent GitLab patch releases. We're talking 18.5 put, 18.4.3, and 18.3.5. We need to properly unpack the whole vulnerability matrix they fix. And let me stress, this isn't just routine stuff. Our sources are flagging some critical high-impact security flaws. These things span everything from unauthenticated availability risks right through to some very targeted supply chain threats.
Yeah, that urgency is definitely warranted. What's kind of striking about this set of fixes is we're not just looking at, minor bugs. We're seeing two fundamentally different kinds of attack profiles here, and both demand a really swift response. So on one hand, you've got these critical, unauthenticated denial of service vectors. Those hit almost every instance going back quite a few years. And then on the other hand, there's this really concerning authenticated improper access control flaw. That one, it basically compromises CI/CD security for anyone on EE. It's a dual threat. Every security pro needs to act fast on this.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this properly then. We really have to start with the highest severity flaw, right? The one posing the most immediate danger to, well, integrity and confidentiality in controlled environments. That's the one focused on improper access control in the runner API.
Precisely. That's CVE 2025-117-002. It scores a CVSS 8.5, which puts it firmly in the high severity bracket. And it represents a significant potential for lateral movement, plus, serious supply chain compromise risk, especially if you're running multi-tenant or sort of shared GitLab setups.
Okay, walk us through the attack mechanics. You mentioned it's EE only, and it needs an authenticated user already inside. That narrows the surface a bit, but really amps up the threat if an account gets popped, right?
Correct. The attackers needs to be authenticated, needs existing project permissions. But the fascinating part, and honestly the alarming part, is the payload. It's the ability for that authenticated user to effectively hijack project runners. And not just any runners from completely different, maybe unrelated projects. It's a total breakdown of the resource isolation boundary that you expect.
Wow, okay, so let me get this straight. If I'm running a big enterprise setup, maybe Project A is just a sandbox, but Project B manages production infrastructure, a developer with fairly low privileges in Project A could potentially seize control of a highly privileged runner meant only for Project B. That sounds like a full environment breakout.
Absolutely. That's exactly the scenario. And the implication for your supply chain integrity, it's massive. If a runner gets hijacked, the attacker gets their hands on all the secrets, the tokens, deployment credentials, everything's stored in that runner's context. They could inject malicious build steps. They could steal sensitive IP, sabotage deployments, you name it. It's an immediate direct threat to the confidentiality of your credentials and the integrity of your whole code delivery pipeline.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely puts CVE 2025-11402 squarely in the drop everything and patch now category for EE users. All right, let's pivot then. Let's look at the availability side of the risk matrix. You mentioned two separate high-severity DoS vectors, and these hit both CE and EE. Crucially, they're unauthenticated.
That's the second and, equally serious part of the story. This broad, unauthenticated threat just to keep the system running. First up, we have CVE 2025-10497. It's a denial of service and event collection, rated CVSS 7.5, so high. Any unauthenticated attacker can exploit this just by sending specially crafted payloads. And it hits both CE and EE, but from version 17.day onwards.
Okay, 17.10 is relatively recent, but still bad. But the second DoS vulnerability, that sounds like the real legacy time bomb, the one administrators running older kit really need to worry about.
That would be CVE 2025-11144E7, also CVSS 7.5, also high. This one's a DoS flaw that comes down to weak JSON validation. The attack vector here is craft GraphQL requests, the specific malformed JSON payloads. What really jumps out at me is the sheer scale, the blast radius. This vulnerability affects instances going all the way back to CE and EE version 11.0.
Version 11.0. Wow. That is technical debt calling collect, isn't it? We're talking instances that could easily be 5, maybe 6 years old, potentially minimally maintained, probably not something sysadmins thought would be vulnerable to a modern, unauthenticated GraphQL attack vector.
Exactly. And when you put these two DoS flaws together, the event handling one and the GraphQL JSON one, it really points to a broader, maybe systemic issue with input validation hardening across the GitLab platform, especially on endpoints designed to take complex structured data from, untrusted sources. For a lot of administrators, this basically forces an emergency patching cycle on systems they might have thought were too old or too segmented to be a current threat.
Right. Let's shift gears slightly then to the medium severity flaws. They might not have that 8.0 plus score, but often they give us deeper insights into internal authorization weaknesses, things that could be chained together.
That's often where you find the really nuanced risk, yeah. Take CDE 2025-71874. It's a DoS issue, rated medium at CVSS 6.5. It's another resource exhaustion attack. An unauthenticated user can trigger DoS just by uploading large files to certain API endpoints. And this one affects instances all the way back to version 11.7. It's sort of a fundamental reminder, isn't it? Even non-essential unauthenticated API paths need strict resource limits, strict size checks, but it's often overlooked.
And there's also a specific internal authorization flaw, CVE 2025-11271, incorrect authorization in pipeline builds, also CVSS 6.5.
Sure.
And this one's interesting because it's CE only.
Yeah, this one's quite important for anyone running the open source version. It needs an authenticated user, sure, but they can trigger unauthorized pipeline runs just by manipulating commits, which really raises serious questions about commit integrity checks and maybe role separation within CE. Essentially, the system trusts the commit metadata too much to trigger the pipeline job. It seems it failed to adequately check if the user submitting the commit actually had the right permissions, the right role to run the associated build logic. So you could have a low-privilege user potentially tricking the system into running high-privilege CI/CD operations, completely bypassing the granular role checks you thought you had.
Huh. That sounds like a classic business logic flaw, where the trust boundary gets placed on the artifact, the commit itself, rather than on the actor, the user doing the action. Okay, before we get to mitigation, let's just quickly touch on the low severity issues. Why should busy security pros care about something rated CVSS 3.8?
Because they often map out the internal risk landscape. These two low-severity examples, both EE-only CVE 2025-6601 and CVE 2025-19-2099, they show how authorization can kind of creep or fail in minor features. One allows unauthorized project access through the access request approval workflow, but only under certain conditions. The other lets authenticated users run unauthorized quick actions using malicious commands hidden in descriptions. Yeah, the impact is low in isolation. But these are often the exact pivot points attackers use for internal recon or chaining attacks together for privilege escalation. They expose sensitive internal pathways that really should have been fully locked down.
Right. So pulling this whole matrix together, we've got a really broad spectrum here. Critical infrastructure takeover risks like the runner hijacking. We've got broad, unauthenticated instability risks with that DoS chain hitting really old legacy systems. And then these more detailed authorization and business logic errors that could be used as like internal stepping stones for an attacker.
Which leads us straight into the action plan. The bottom line for every security professional listening right now is that the required patch cadence is immediate. No delays. The fixes are in versions 18.5.1, 18.4.3, and 18.3.5. If you're running any self-managed instance, CE or EE, within those affected version ranges, you really must upgrade immediately. Get to the latest supported patch for your major version branch.
Okay, immediate patching. Got it. Now, from an operational standpoint, for the deployment teams, there's actually some critical, potentially time-saving good news here, though.
Right.
What should ops teams know to help speed this up without causing chaos?
Yeah, this is significant good news for ops. These security patches, they're focused enough that they do not introduce any new database migrations. So for administrators managing those complex multi-node, high availability setups, this generally means patching can be done without requiring operational downtime. That massively reduces the complexity and the risk of applying these patches quickly. It's a huge factor favoring rapid deployment, which, as we've said, needs to be the top priority.
That is good news. Okay, so beyond just running the upgrade script, what specific actions, maybe post-patch checks or hardening steps, should our audience take, especially thinking about those high-impact vectors like the runner hijacking and the DoS issues?
Right, good point. Because of the extreme risk from CVE 2025-111202, that runner hijacking flaw, you absolutely must conduct an immediate and thorough review of all your existing CI/CD runner permissions. Mandatory. You need to make sure runner registration tokens and project scopes are aggressively segmented. Double check, triple check that no project has access to a runner designated for a higher security environment. And furthermore, given those pervasive DoS threats, especially the unauthenticated ones, you should seriously consider ramping up monitoring. Look closely at public-facing API upload endpoints and pipeline trigger activity. Watch for any unusual spikes, weird access patterns, anything that might signal reconnaissance or active attack attempts.
So thinking bigger picture, what does this whole situation mean for infrastructure management maturity? The fact that people might need to patch systems running version 11.0 that forces everyone to confront potentially years of technical debt, right? And
No.
do it on an accelerated timeline.
It's effectively a systemic stress test, isn't it? The key takeaways are pretty stark. You've got that sophisticated, authenticated attack path, allowing lateral movement via runner hijacking in EE. That's critical.
Okay.
And then you have the broad, unauthenticated DoS chain, threatening the stability of almost every legacy instance still out there. Again, critical. Immediate patching is just non-negotiable.
Okay, so given that multiple high-severity flaws here stem from, fundamentally, improper input validation, whether it's complex stuff like GraphQL on JSON payloads or simpler things like API file uploads, I want to leave you, our listeners, with this thought to chew on. What are the long-term architectural implications for CI/CD platforms like GitLab that rely so heavily on these complex, often nested API interactions? And how does this inherent complexity just keep expanding the threat model, especially for the unauthenticated user? Think about those old endpoints on your instances. Seriously, go audit your oldest running GitLab instances right now, because version 11.0 and likely others nearby remain potential soft targets until you can confirm that patch is firmly in place and applied.